courtroom was packed that morning, the air thick with murmurs and judgmental glances. A simple woman named Sarah stood quietly near the defense bench, her hands trembling as she clutched her worn-out purse. Her plain clothes and modest shoes made her stand out among the expensive suits and polished heels. People whispered, assuming she didn't belong there. Even the clerk gave her a cold, dismissive look, as if she were wasting everyone's time. Sarah had come to the court for something deeply personal, a matter that had shaken her family and dignity. But before she could even speak, one of the lawyers smirked and said loudly, "Ma'am, you might be in the wrong place. This isn't a charity office." Laughter echoed softly across the room. She lowered her eyes, humiliated, her heart heavy, but her silence steady. No one knew the truth about who she really was, or what she carried beneath that calm face. Every eye watched as she stepped closer to the judge's bench, her voice soft yet firm as she said she had a matter to discuss directly with the presiding judge. The guards hesitated, unsure of what to do. The lawyer scoffed again, but something in Sarah's gaze stopped him cold, an authority that didn't match her appearance. Moments later, a sudden announcement echoed through the hall. "All rise for the new appointed judge." Everyone stood, confused, and when the door opened, their jaws dropped. The same woman they had mocked began walking toward the bench, her steps steady, her name now spoken with respect, Judge Sarah Malik. But what happened next left even the senior lawyer speechless, because Sarah wasn't there for revenge. She was there for justice, and her first case would change everything. Gasps filled the courtroom as Sarah took her seat at the bench. The same people who had laughed at her now stood frozen, their confidence replaced by disbelief. The lawyer who mocked her earlier tried to smile politely, but his face had turned pale. The clerk avoided eye contact, shuffling papers nervously. Sarah adjusted her robe, her expression calm yet unreadable. It wasn't pride that filled her, it was purpose. She had returned to this courtroom not as a victim, but as someone determined to set things right. Before she began the proceedings, Sarah glanced around the room, her mind drifting back to the years that had brought her here. She had once stood in this same court as a young widow, fighting for her late husband's small property after it was unjustly taken by people with money and influence. No one had believed her back then. The same lawyer who humiliated her today had represented the other side, twisting the truth until she lost everything. That day, she had walked out of this courtroom broken, but not defeated. Sarah had promised herself that she would return one day, not to plead, but to serve justice. She had studied tirelessly, working small jobs, reading law books late into the night. Every struggle, every tear had become her motivation. And now, she was sitting in the very place where her pain had once begun. The courtroom watched in silence as she opened the first file on her desk. It was a familiar name, the same businessman who had wronged her years ago. Her fingers paused for a moment, but her face showed no emotion. The crowd could sense something powerful was coming, though no one could predict just how far this story would go or how much truth it would reveal. Sarah scanned the case file, her expression steady, though her heart quietly raced beneath her calm exterior. The businessman sitting across the room, Mr. Harun Qureshi, didn't recognize her at first. He sat confidently with his team of lawyers, the same arrogance that once crushed others visible in every gesture. But when his eyes finally met hers, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. It was as if a buried memory had begun to resurface, a memory he wasn't ready to face. The courtroom remained silent, everyone sensing that something more personal was unfolding. Sarah began reading through the details of the case, allegations of land grabbing, false ownership papers, and intimidation of poor families. Each accusation mirrored her own past, almost as if fate had brought the same injustice back to her, this time for her to confront it with authority. Meanwhile, whispers spread in the audience. Some of the junior lawyers exchanged nervous glances. They had heard rumors about a woman who once lost everything in this very courtroom, then vanished for years before reappearing as a judge. Could this be her? No one dared to ask aloud. Sarah's clerk, a young man named Balal, noticed the tension in her eyes. He admired her, but didn't yet know the story behind her calm strength. Later, during a recess, he hesitated before asking, "Madam, do you know Mr. Qureshi?" She simply replied, "I know his kind." As the session resumed, Sarah listened carefully as the defense tried to manipulate the facts. But with every lie spoken, her resolve grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for the families in this case. She was fighting for the woman she used to be. The tension in the room deepened, as everyone sensed that the past and present were on a collision course that could shake the entire court. The next hearing drew an even larger crowd. People filled every seat, whispering about the quiet judge who seemed to know too much about the case before her. Sarah entered the courtroom with her usual calm, but beneath that composed surface, her mind was sharp and ready. She had spent the entire night reviewing every file, every document, every old record connected to Mr. Haroon Qureshi's company. The deeper she looked, the clearer the pattern became: fraud, manipulation, and years of injustice buried under layers of influence. When Haroon took the stand, he spoke smoothly, as if confident his charm and connections would protect him again. "Your Honor," he said, pretending respect, "these accusations are baseless. I've always conducted my business fairly." Sarah watched him closely, her expression unreadable. The audience could feel her silence weighing heavier than any words. Then she leaned forward slightly and asked, "Mr. Qureshi, do you remember a woman named Sarah Malik?" The question hung in the air like a spark before lightning. Haroon hesitated. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. The courtroom turned still, every lawyer, every reporter waiting for his answer. "I might have dealt with many cases, Your Honor," he stammered. Sarah didn't respond. She simply handed a document to the clerk. It was an old file, one that bore her own name from years ago. Stamped, "Dismissed." Gasps echoed across the room. Haroon's confidence cracked, his voice trembling as he tried to explain. "That case was handled properly," he said, but his words fell flat. Sarah's eyes never left him. The weight of justice was slowly turning toward truth. By now, even the spectators could feel something big was about to happen, an unveiling that could expose far more than anyone in that courtroom was prepared to face. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, Sarah received an anonymous envelope delivered to her chamber during a short recess. It had no sender's name, only a faint court seal. Inside was a single document, an old deed signed years ago, proving that Haroon's company wasn't just responsible for land fraud. It was backed by someone within the court system itself, someone powerful. Her heartbeat quickened as she recognized the signature. It belonged to Justice Rafiq, a retired senior judge who had once been her mentor and the very person who presided over her old case. Sarah stared at the paper in disbelief. The betrayal ran deeper than she ever imagined. Her case wasn't lost because of bad luck. It was buried deliberately. And now, sitting in her courtroom, were the same faces who had kept silent back then. She realized this trial wasn't just about Haroon. It was about exposing the system that had failed her and countless others. As the court resumed, Haroon's lawyer suddenly changed his tone. He began attacking the credibility of the prosecution's evidence, claiming the documents were tampered. His words were sharp, but Sarah's attention drifted to the back row. A man in a dark suit entered quietly, watching her with unsettling calm. It was Justice Rafiq himself. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent confrontation between truth and power. The audience felt the shift instantly. Whispers spread like wildfire. Why was a retired judge suddenly attending this hearing? Haroon noticed him too, and his nervousness turned into confidence again, as if backup had arrived. Sarah took a slow breath, her grip tightening on the gavel. She now knew the real battle wasn't only against a corrupt businessman, but against the very shadows of the institution she had sworn to protect. The stakes had just doubled, and there was no turning back. The courtroom was packed tighter than ever the next morning. Reporters had gathered, the public was buzzing, and every eye was fixed on Judge Sarah Malik. She sat poised, her expression calm, but her gaze sharp with quiet determination. Everyone sensed that today would decide everything. As the proceedings began, Sarah called for the final evidence to be presented. The prosecution brought forward new files, original documents proving Haroon's illegal land transfers. Every signature, every seal, matched perfectly with the fraudulent deeds. Haroon's lawyer objected, shouting that the papers were forged. But before he could continue, Sarah lifted the anonymous deed she had received. The room fell silent. "This document," she said clearly, bears the signature of a former judge who authorized false property claims. This means the corruption didn't stop at one man. It started within these very walls. Gasps echoed through the room. Justice Rafiq shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah's voice didn't waver as she called him to the stand, her tone steady but filled with quiet fire. Under questioning, Rafiq tried to deny involvement, but evidence began to pile up. Emails, bank records, and testimonies from former clerks. Piece by piece, the truth unraveled before everyone's eyes. The same system that once silenced Sarah was now exposed in the full light of justice. Finally, Sarah turned to Haroon. Years ago, I stood in this court with no power, no voice. Today, I stand not for revenge, but to ensure no one else is treated the way I was. Her words carried the weight of every struggle she had endured. Just as the crowd thought it was over, Sarah revealed one last twist. The anonymous envelope hadn't come from an enemy, but from within the court staff. Someone had risked everything to help her expose the truth. Justice was finally served, but it had taken courage, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of a woman they once underestimated. When the final verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted in stunned silence. Haroon was found guilty of fraud and property theft, while an internal inquiry was launched against Justice Rafiq for his part in covering it up. For the first time, the people who once controlled the system were being held accountable. Sarah looked around the room, her heart heavy but calm. She hadn't come here for triumph, she came for truth. And now, justice had finally spoken in the same hall where she was once silenced. Outside the court, people gathered to catch a glimpse of her. Reporters called her name, asking how it felt to expose such powerful figures. Sarah simply smiled and said, "Justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who refuse to give up." Her words quickly spread across news outlets and social media, inspiring thousands of ordinary people who had faced injustice in their own lives. Later that evening, Sarah sat quietly in her office, watching the city lights through the window. The anonymous envelope lay on her desk, a reminder that even in a broken system, there are still people brave enough to do what's right. Alal, her young clerk, knocked gently and said, "Ma'am, the people are calling you the voice of the voiceless." She smiled softly and replied, "I'm just someone who remembered how it feels to be unheard." As the courthouse emptied and the night settled, Sarah closed her files and looked toward the empty bench. It was more than just a seat of power. It was a place of responsibility. She had proven that dignity and honesty could stand against corruption. And as she turned off the lights, her quiet strength left behind a message that would echo far beyond the courtroom. No one is ever too simple to make a difference.